The Middle East has always been a region where tension simmers just beneath the surface, but few scenarios carry the weight of what would unfold if the United States were to deploy ground troops inside Iran. This is not a hypothetical that military strategists take lightly. It is a question that has been debated in war rooms, think tanks, and intelligence briefings for decades. Iran is not Iraq in 2003. It is not Afghanistan. It is a nation of nearly 90 million people with a battle-hardened military, a deeply entrenched revolutionary ideology, and a geographic position that makes it one of the most strategically consequential countries on the planet. To understand what would really happen, we need to strip away the political noise and look at the cold, hard reality of what such a deployment would trigger, not just in Iran, but across the entire world. The moment American boots touch Iranian soil in a combat capacity, the United States would be entering the most complex military theater it has ever faced. Iran's armed forces are divided into two primary structures, the conventional Iranian army and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, commonly known as the IRGC. The IRGC alone has over 190,000 active personnel, and that number does not account for the Basij, a paramilitary volunteer force that could mobilize hundreds of thousands of additional fighters within days. Iran has spent the last 4 decades preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. They have studied American military doctrine, identified vulnerabilities, and built an asymmetric warfare strategy designed to bleed a technologically superior enemy through guerrilla tactics, urban warfare, and proxy engagement. The terrain itself becomes a weapon. Iran's mountainous borders, vast deserts, and densely populated urban centers like Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad would make conventional military advances extraordinarily costly. American forces would face not just a military but an entire population that, regardless of political opinion toward its own government, would largely unify against a foreign invasion. History has shown this pattern repeatedly, and Iran would be no different. Within hours of a confirmed American military deployment into Iran, the world would feel the economic shockwave before a single major battle was even fought. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important choke point for global oil supply. Approximately 20% of the world's oil and nearly 30% of all liquefied natural gas passes through this narrow waterway every single day. Iran has long maintained the capability and the stated intention to close the Strait of Hormuz in the event of a major military conflict. Using a combination of naval mines, anti-ship missiles, fast attack boats, and submarine warfare, Iran could effectively paralyze global energy markets within 48 hours. Oil prices would not just rise, they would spike to levels not seen in modern history, potentially exceeding $200 per barrel according to several economic projections. This would trigger inflation across every major economy, disrupt supply chains that are already fragile, and push developing nations into severe economic crises. The ripple effect would be felt from gas stations in Ohio to manufacturing plants in Germany to fishing villages in Southeast Asia, compounding the global economic catastrophe already set in motion. Over decades, Tehran has built what it calls the Axis of Resistance, a vast network of proxy forces spread across the Middle East and beyond. Hezbollah in Lebanon is arguably the most powerful non-state military force in the world, with an estimated arsenal of over 150,000 rockets and missiles capable of striking deep into Israel. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza would re-engage with renewed intensity. The Houthi movement in Yemen, which has already demonstrated the ability to strike targets across the Arabian Peninsula and disrupt Red Sea shipping, would escalate dramatically. Iraqi Shia militias, many of which are directly funded and trained by the IRGC, no analysis of this scenario is complete without examining how the world's other major powers would respond. Russia and China have both deepened their strategic relationships with Iran in recent years. Russia signed a comprehensive cooperation agreement with Iran and has been a consistent opponent of American unilateral military action in the region. China, which is Iran's largest oil customer and has invested billions of dollars into Iranian infrastructure through its Belt and Road Initiative, would face an immediate economic crisis as Iranian oil exports collapsed. Neither Russia nor China would likely engage American forces directly in Iran. The risk of nuclear escalation makes that scenario too dangerous for all parties. However, both nations would accelerate their support for Iran through intelligence sharing, weapons resupply through back channels, and aggressive diplomatic campaigns at the United Nations Security Council. Russia would likely use the distraction to press its own strategic interests in Eastern Europe. China might use the window of American military overextension to increase pressure on Taiwan. The conflict in Iran would not stay contained to Iran. It would reshape the entire global order, accelerating the shift away from American unipolar dominance that has been underway for years. Behind every strategic calculation is a human cost that rarely receives the attention it deserves. A military conflict of this scale inside Iran would produce a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. Iran's population of nearly 90 million people would face the destruction of critical infrastructure, power grids, water treatment facilities, hospitals, and transportation networks. The United Nations and international aid organizations have consistently warned that modern warfare in densely populated nations produces refugee crises that overwhelm neighboring countries and international systems. Millions of Iranians could be displaced, flooding into Turkey, Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. The refugee crisis that emerged from Syria, which has a population of roughly 22 million, destabilized European politics and strained international institutions for years. An Iranian refugee crisis would be 4 times larger in potential scale. Beyond displacement, the humanitarian toll of casualties, disease, and famine in a conflict zone of this size would be measured in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives. The moral weight of this reality cannot be separated from the strategic conversation. Inside the United States, the deployment of troops into Iran would ignite a political firestorm unlike anything seen since the Vietnam War era. The American public, already deeply skeptical of foreign military engagements after 2 decades of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, would be deeply divided. Protests would erupt in cities across the country. Congressional debates would become fierce with questions about constitutional war powers, the financial cost of the conflict, and the human toll on American service members dominating the national conversation. The economic burden alone would be staggering. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost the United States an estimated $8 trillion over 20 years. A conflict with Iran, a far more capable adversary, would carry an even greater price tag. Military recruitment, already facing challenges, would come under severe strain. Gold Star families would grow in number. The political consequences for any administration that initiated such a conflict without clear public support and congressional authorization would be severe and long-lasting. If history teaches us anything, it is that the world that emerges from a major conflict is never the world that existed before it. A military confrontation between the United States and Iran would not simply end when the shooting stopped. It would leave behind a fractured Middle East, a weakened international order, and a global economy struggling to recover from years of disruption. The question of what comes after is perhaps the most important one of all. Who governs Iran in the aftermath? How are proxy forces demobilized? How does the world rebuild trust in diplomatic institutions that would have failed to prevent the conflict? These are not questions with easy answers. What is certain is that the consequence of such a deployment would extend far beyond any military objective, reshaping the lives of hundreds of millions of people across the globe for generations to come. The decision to deploy troops is never just a military one. It is a choice about the kind of world we are willing to leave behind.